Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got another news rumor review to discuss. In today's video, we've got a couple of signings to discuss, a long list of very interesting news and injury updates, and we've got some trade rumors involving the Penguins, Red Wings, Islanders, and the Montreal Canadiens. We'll get to all the updates regarding these teams coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future. Now in today's video, as per usual, to start with, we'll look at some signings from our past couple days. We saw 3 signings I want to touch on here today from over the past few days. So first, back over on September the 3rd, we saw a very interesting signing involving the Ottawa Senators, and it was with one of their RFAs. It's Donovan Sebrango, 23-year-old defensive prospect who's been mostly an NHL level player over the past couple of years, signs a 1-year league minimum deal in the Ottawa Senators organization. So Sebrango is a decent prospect. He was one of the pieces that was acquired in the Alex DeBrincat trade a couple of years back. He had 8 goals and 20 points in 50 AHL games this past season. Also had no points in 2 NHL games. So a pretty solid season last year from Sebrango. I think he's mostly going to be an AHL level guy again next year, but easily could be one of the first call-up options the Ottawa Senators make. 1-year league minimum, not a bad deal there for the Senators. If it doesn't work out, they can not qualify and walk away from his UFA next year. So I think this is a very low risk, really solid deal there for one of the younger defensive prospects who wasn't signed yet. So very interesting note there, but the Senators have signed Sebrango to a 1-year extension. And then we saw 2 Blues prospects sign 3-year ELCs. The first one was a 2023 7th round pick, and that is winger 20-year-old prospect Nikita Susyev. Susyev gets a 3-year ELC with the AV of $855,000. That's a very interesting pickup here. Susyev last year played in the KHL/MHL/VHL. He played in 12 MHL games, putting up 3 goals and 4 points. He played in 12 VHL games and putting up a goal and 5 points. So it wasn't a bad season last year in the VHL for Susyev, and the Blues have saw enough to sign him to his ELC. So very interesting note there. But a 7th round pick from a couple of years back, he signed his ELC in St. Louis. Another guy who signed his ELC in St. Louis is former 2025 first round pick Justin Carbonneau. Carbonneau, who was the 19th overall selection in the 2025 draft. He's a right winger, 18 years old, gets a 3-year ELC, AAV of $975,000. Now Carbonneau's not going to make the NHL this year, but long term he has the potential to be a solid top 6 right winger for the St. Louis Blues. Carbonneau this past year had 46 goals, 89 points in 62 QMJHL games. So he had a really solid season over in the QMJHL. A Blues signed to his ELC, and like I said, it probably won't be this year. I'll probably go back over the juniors, but in the next couple of seasons, I think Carbonneau could really come out as like a solid top 6 forward for the Blues in the next few years. So a really solid pickup here from the St. Louis Blues. So those were 3 signings from our past couple of days, as Susyev and Carbonneau get 3-year ELCs in St. Louis, while RFA Sebrango gets a new deal with the Ottawa Senators. So very interesting note there. And next, going over to a couple of very intriguing injury and news updates. So when it comes to some injury news updates, we've got some very interesting things to talk about here. First, when it comes to the injury segment, Luca Morelli will be out until mid-December after having surgery for a torn labrum. So Morelli was probably never going to make the NHL roster for the Columbus Blue Jackets. He is one of the top prospects though, so this will hamper his development a little bit. So very interesting note there. One of the Jackets' top prospects will be out until mid-December. Jet Luchanko, who last year surprised a whole bunch of people making the NHL roster, might miss the start of training camp with a groin injury. It doesn't sound like it's too serious, and it sounds like he will be back at some point, but it sounds like he will miss at least some of development camp, maybe even some of training camp. So that's a bad blow there for the Flyers, and especially Luchanko has a shot to make the NHL roster this year. Jarvis is apparently recovering well from his shoulder surgery he sustained. I think it was in the Eastern Conference Final last year. Matthew Barzal should be ready to go for training camp after suffering a knee injury. Doesn't sound like it's going to be 100%, but it is going to be ready to go for training camp, so it's a big boost there for the New York Islanders. Owen Power is fully healthy and recovered from his lower body injury sustained late last year in the regular season, and Tyler Seguin has fully recovered from a shoulder injury that he sustained in in the Western Conference Finals. So very interesting note there. Lots of very positive injury updates, and we're probably going to have more injury updates as we get closer and closer to training camp. But Jarvis, Barzal, Power, Sagan should all be ready to go for training camp. Well, Luchanko may miss the start of training camp, and then Morelli will be out until mid-December. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to a couple of other very interesting pieces of news. Zach Dean, one of the top prospects in the St. Louis Blues organization, the prospect they got from the Vegas Golden Knights in exchange for Ivan Barbashev a couple of years back, has went into the NHLPA Players Assistance Program. So it's not overly great news there. Usually it's going to take a couple of months in the Player Assistance Program until they get back out. So for this time, we hope that whatever he's dealing with, he's able to recover from and do better. But it does sound like Dean's going to be in the NHLPA Players Assistance Program for a little bit. So very interesting note there. But one of the top prospects for the Blues, and Dean, has gone to the Players Assistance Program. So very interesting note there. Apparently, Edmonton, according to the NHL, has been cleared from any wrongdoings regarding the LTIR usage last year. So there was a couple of reports, I think it was just after the Stanley Cup final, that the Edmonton Oilers were being investigated for the LTIR usage for Evander Kane. And I don't think anyone was surprised that nothing came of this. Like, the LTIR system was used for a lot of other teams before them, like Vegas with Mark Stone, like Florida with Matthew Tkachuk, like Tampa with Nikita Kucherov. Like, there were a whole bunch of teams who have used that LTIR loophole, which seems to be closing this upcoming season. But the Edmonton Oilers are clear from any sort of wrongdoings when it comes to the LTIR usage. So very interesting note there. Going over to a couple of very interesting PTO updates. So the Nashville Predators have signed Dylan Gambrell to a PTO. Florida has signed Gregor, Mott, Harper to a PTO. Dallas has signed Ernie to a PTO. Montreal has signed Mandolese to a PTO. And according to some recent reports, the Flames are not expected to sign very much, if any, players to PTO. So very interesting note there. Gambrell spent the past couple seasons in, I think, Toronto, Columbus, like those sorts of teams. He's an AHL level guy who can be a call-up option, so we shall see if he gets an NHL contract from Nashville. Gregor, Mott, Harper all going to Florida on a PTO. Gregor and Mott have been solid bomb six forwards in the past. Gregor with guys like Ottawa and San Jose and Toronto. Mott with teams like New York, Vancouver, Columbus. So I could see them potentially get like 1 year league minimum deals if they were able to have a good enough training camp with Florida. Harper's more of an AHL level guy. Not sure if he'll be able to get an NHL level contract, but he's going to camp on a PTO with Florida. Adam Ernie, former bomb six guy with teams like Detroit and Tampa, going to camp on a PTO with the Dallas Stars. Now the Stars do have some solid bomb six holes, so I could see Ernie get there. I wouldn't be surprised if he got an NHL level contract, but given the fact he hasn't been an overly great NHL player over the past couple of years, I think he most likely will not. The Montreal Canadiens have signed goalie Kevin Mandolese to a PTO, former Senators prospect, Avalanche guy, so he could, I think, potentially get like a 1 year league minimum deal just to provide some goalie depth for the Montreal Canadiens. But they have a couple of decent guys like Dobesh, like Kakkonen. I think Fowler just signed his ELC. So like, I wouldn't be surprised if Mandolese didn't get a contract with the Habs, but he's going to camp on a PTO with them. So very interesting note there. And then it sounds like, according to some recent reports, the Flames have a couple of really solid young prospects. They want to see get some NHL level options this year, so it doesn't sound like they're going to be bringing any sort of veterans on PTO. So very interesting note there. Those are all the PTO updates from our past couple of days. And last here, just going over to mention one very interesting and surprising piece of news. Apparently, according to some recent reports, I think it was from Frank Seravalli and a couple of other sources, I can't guarantee this because Bill Guerin has come out and said that he thinks that these were fabricated reports, so maybe that's a possibility. Seravalli is a pretty connected insider though, so I wouldn't say it's a guarantee that these are fabricated. But according to some recent reports, Kaprizov has rejected a contract for the Minnesota Wild that tallies an 8-year contract extension with AV of $128 million. It was an 8-year deal with AV of $16 million per season. He rejected it. So that's led Wild fans to really panic, because if this is true, that will have made Kaprizov the highest paid player, will have surpassed Draisaitl by $2+ million. So that's extremely surprising news. Now there's a couple of ways you could think about this. One, Kaprizov wants more money. Like, I would be surprised if he wants more money. Like, $16 million for Kaprizov's pushing it. Like, he should be like a $13 to $14 million forward. $16 million is pushing it. Do the Wild really want to go $17, $18 million on an 8-year deal? I'm not exactly sure. On top of that, you could see another scenario where Kaprizov only wants to sign like a 3 to 5 year deal. So maybe if the Wild really want to sign Kaprizov, they ask for a lower AAV on a shorter term, maybe like a 3-year deal or a 4-year deal. Like, $12 to $13 million. That's a possibility. Another possibility is Kaprizov just doesn't want to be in Minnesota anymore, and he may want to be having a fresh start and hit free agency next year, in which case do the Wild consider trading Kirill Kaprizov? There's a lot of options out there. We'll probably discuss this in a couple of later videos, but it's very interesting to note that Kaprizov turned down that much money to sign with the Minnesota Wild. So very interesting note there. But those are all the updates from our past couple of days regarding injuries, regarding PTO updates, Edmonton with the LTIR usage, team going into the Players Assistance Program, and the insane Kaprizov rejection. So very interesting note there. And lastly here, going over to a couple of trade rumors. So going over to a couple of trade rumors, we've got some very interesting trade rumors here to talk about. We're going to start with the New York Islanders. According to a recent article from, I think it was The Athletic, Matthew Dush was recently talking to some of the Athletic people, and he mentions that a league extension is probably not going to happen in the very near future. He says that he's willing to wait on an Anders Lee extension. Now, Lee is entering a final year for his deal, got $7 million AAV. I think he's 35 years old, but he's also the team's captain. Now, I think this is a very smart move from Matthew Dush to not rush into a contract extension. He says he wants to evaluate the forward group, evaluate the team. This is Dush's first year with the New York Islanders as their GM, so he wants to sort of evaluate this team before going into a contract extension with Anders Lee. Now, I know and I get that Lee is the team's captain, really solid leader on the team, as at one point was like a 35 to 40 goal scorer for the New York Islanders, but he's 35 years old. Like, unless Lee's willing to sign on an extension, like a 2 to 3 year deal with an AV of like $3 to $4 million, I don't think that's a really smart move there for the New York Islanders. Any means to sign Lee to a preemptive extension. Like, I don't think that's the right move there for the Islanders. So we're gonna have to wait and see what happens here. I think it's a possibility that Anders Lee could get extended, but I think especially if the Islanders start out slow out of the gate, Lee becomes a really prime trade target, especially if the Islanders were to retain 50% of his contract. So we'll have to wait and see on that, but I think it is the right move for Matthew Dush, in my opinion at least, to not sign Anders Lee to an extension at this current point in time, and at least wait a couple of months to see how the Islanders do in the season and see if it's the right money value to sign Anders Lee. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Next, going over to Josh Yohe, The Athletic, who was talking once again about the Pittsburgh Penguins. He says he could see the Pittsburgh Penguins move Erik Karlsson in the very near future. He says that he still believes Erik Karlsson will get moved at some point. He says he could easily see it happen in the very near future. He says the team he's hearing the most be linked to Erik Karlsson is the Detroit Red Wings. Now, we have talked about this before. Doesn't make sense for the Red Wings. I personally do think it does make sense. I know that the Red Wings could probably use more of a defensive-minded top four defenseman who could play 5v5 minutes and play really well. I know Karlsson's more of a power play specialist, offensive defenseman instead of a defensive-minded guy. I know all of this stuff, but if you look at what the Red Wings have on their current defensive core, Sherratt, Hull, Hamnick, who they just signed. Like, these are third pair guys who are getting way overpaid. And I don't think with the current group that the Red Wings have, they're solid enough players at the NHL level. Now, I do think that the Red Wings have some decent guys. Sider's a really solid top four defenseman. Edmonton's starting to come into his own. They've got guys like Albert Johansson who had a pretty solid season last year. Willander, Buim, Sandy and Pellica are going to start coming in the next couple of years. So they have promise. But I just think this current team needs better top four defensemen. Even though I don't think Karlsson will fit the bill as a solid defensive-minded, solid 5v5 defenseman, I think he'd be a drastic improvement on what this team currently has on this current roster. Now, like I said, I'm not sure what the Penguins would want for Karlsson. Like, if they were retaining a little bit of money, they probably want a little bit more. So will they want like a first-round pick in return, a second-round pick and a decent prospect? Will they want multiple pieces? I'm not exactly sure what Pittsburgh's looking for here. Will they want like a young NHL player? But I definitely think if there's an opportunity out there and the deal is right for the Red Wings, they should completely 100% try and pounce on an Erik Karlsson deal, because I think their current group, their current defensive core, is just not going to work for them. So we'll have to wait and see on that, but Josh Yohe does believe that Erik Karlsson could get moved at some point, potentially during training camp, and that the team he's hearing the most about when it comes to Erik Karlsson is Detroit, so we shall have to wait and see on that. Next, going over to the Montreal Canadiens, it's all a recent article. Once again, no insiders linking it or anything, just a recent article speculating that the Montreal Canadiens might not be done making moves after the Carey Price deal. Now, we're going to have a video coming out about this this in the next day or two, talking about Carey Price's trade. But if you haven't noticed, Carey Price was dealt to the San Jose Sharks. So that has freed up a lot of money for the Montreal Canadiens. They're out of the LTIR space. They have currently, I think it's around $4.5 million in cap space, and that is a projected $20 million in cap space at the trade deadline. So that's going to surge a whole bunch. So with that in mind, there's a lot of people to speculate, and mentioned in this article, the Canadiens could try and make some more moves with that now newfound cap space. So they could try and look for someone like, there's some talk about second line center all throughout the offseason that they go after before season starts, potentially even to try and go after a guy like Mason McTavish, Marco Rossi, Pavel Zacha. There's a couple of solid center upgrades. They could look to try and make some sort of a move for a potential top 4 defenseman, especially with Mike Matheson being a pending UFA. They could try and look for a top 6 forward with Laine being a pending UFA. There's a very interesting ways that these two teams should go for the Montreal Canadiens. So we'll have to wait and see on that. No guarantees by any means. Anything happens immediately. But very interesting note there that after freeing up $10.5 million in cap space and now having a lot more cap room to play with, the Montreal Canadiens could not be done and may try and make some more moves. So I'll have to wait and see on that. And next, going over to a recent report from Pierre LeBrun and Pat Brisson. They were doing an interview recently, and Pierre LeBrun mentioned, is there a possibility to Sidney Crosby's agent Pat Brisson that Crosby could get dealt at some point? And Brisson didn't downplay that. He did say it's a possibility. Now, according to a couple of recent reports after this sort of interview came out and this article came out, there's a lot of speculation recently that about Crosby potentially getting dealt. Now, from what I've been hearing from insiders, guys like Darren Dreger, some of the other guys on TSN, some of the other guys, like I think Elliot Friedman mentioned it, the ball's in Sidney Crosby's court. It seems like it. If Crosby eventually wants to get dealt, it seems like he'll be open to being moved, and the Penguins will be open to accommodating that for him. If he wants to remain a lifelong Penguin and play out the last 2 years of a contract, then it seems like he'll be playing out the last 2 years of a contract. It really does depend on what Sidney Crosby does. But if the Penguins have a slow start to this upcoming season, they're not doing overly well, they're probably one of the worst teams come the trade deadline, does Sidney Crosby look at this team, say he wants to have one more shot at the Stanley Cup and maybe ask for a trade? That's a possibility. I don't think it's a likely possibility. I think with Crosby and the way he's gone about things throughout his entire career, I think he'll probably stay on the Penguins for the entirety of his contract. Like, I think that's probably the most likely scenario. But it would be very, very, very interesting if there was a potentiality of a Crosby trade. And like I said, I think personally, my opinion, Crosby's going to stay with the Penguins for his entire career. But it would be a very interesting scenario if Crosby could potentially get moved. And we've heard a lot about Colorado because one of his best friends, Nate McKinnon's there. We've heard a lot about Montreal because he has some very interesting connections to Montreal. Those were two main teams that have been speculated, but I think there would be a whole bunch of other teams who would have some major interest in Sidney Crosby should he be wanting out of Pittsburgh at some point. So we shall wait and see on that. No guarantees by any means that Crosby will get dealt, but just very interesting to note that Crosby's agent Pat Brisson said it's at least a possibility. So I'll have to wait and see on that. But that's all I want to talk for today. I left you guys' thoughts. Do you think we could see a Crosby trade at some point over the next year or two? Do you think that Anders Lee will get extended by the New York Islanders? Do you think that Karlsson could get dealt potentially to the Detroit Red Wings? And do you think that the Montreal Canadiens are poised to make more moves? I'll let you guys thoughts on all of that, plus all of the news updates and the signings from our past couple of days down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to talk for today. We're going to like this video, and if you're listening, subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for more videos coming out in the very near future. I also do a blog, news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so check that out. I've linked to that in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.